Y'all are getting it. You're getting it. I'm going to start to see it. It's good to see everybody this morning. I guess it's a one-way street. That's okay. It's okay. It's just a lot of disappointment in the room. I walked out. I felt it just like, oh, let's maybe do some more music, Kia. I think they maybe want that. So it's coming. It's great to see everybody. My name is Ryan. I'm the lead pastor here at Crossroads. How many of you have been at Crossroads, say, longer than 2 years? Raise your hand up nice and high. 2 years. Keep your hands up nice and high. I want to look at you. I just want to give you a big thank you because this past few weeks I've been able to meet a few families who have started attending, and they are here because you all have been committed, and you give and you support and you create ministries that create a safe space for people. And so give yourselves a great big hand. If you've only been here less than 2 years, don't give yourselves a big hand. You're too new for that. You can't. You just soak it in right now, all right? We'll get you later, all right? Get you later. If you're a guest, if you're tuning in online today, like I mentioned, my name is Ryan. I'm the lead pastor here. Wonderful to see everybody. I am a white, cisgender, heterosexual, male, Christian born. Did you follow that? Which basically means I hit the absolute privilege lottery jackpot here in America. The Constitution was written for me, and I have benefited greatly. And part of what I want to do, part of what I think our spirituality is, part of what the timeless message of Jesus is learning to understand and recognize where privilege exists that oppresses, to set that privilege aside and to work towards the justice and righteousness that Jesus called the kingdom of God. And we call it the peacemaking path around here. Philippians chapter 2 tells us that this Jesus, this Christ, who was God in so many ways, considered to be God, set aside all that privilege and became like a slave. And that's what we're trying to do around here at Crossroads Church. That's the path we're learning to walk. We're not perfect, but we're learning to walk it. So whoever you are, wherever you are, however you've come here today, if you are skeptical, if you are certain about faith, if you're hopeful, if you're hurting, you're welcome here. This is a space that we want you to feel safe, to ask any question, to get no answers. That's just how we roll around here, but we wrestle around in the mud of the questions because the questions are what is powerful, not the answers. And I could just close the service out right there because that really is what transforms us, are the questions of life and faith. And we're walking this peacemaking path together. So we're in a series called Rethink. And for those of you that might be tuning in today for the first time, oh, by the way, my cell phone number is in the program. If we've never gotten together for coffee or whiskey or tea or whatever it might be, shoot me a text message. I would love to do that. Love to hear a bit of your story, share a bit of mine, the story of our church, all that good stuff. So about 4 weeks ago, we launched this series. And we started talking about our thoughts. And we said that not every thought is true, but every thought has power. I want to thank the back right corner. Very good. Thought has power. And that rethinking them is the first step towards resilience, rethinking our thoughts, right? And then week 2, we started talking about feelings. And we said feelings are real, but they're not always reliable. Very good. If you're not sure, go with like a letter that starts with, real, reliable, right? I'm still got a little pastor blood in me, all right? Week 3, we started talking about like mental schemas, and we got like really deep. We like dug into theory around like how our thoughts and our feelings kind of come together to create these schemas that are shortcuts in our lives. But here's the thing, those shortcuts oftentimes, this is a tricky one. The shortcuts oftentimes short circuit. That was a cute one. But obviously not memorable. Okay, so I'm just making this up as I go, people. I've had a busy week. I haven't prepared a thing for this moment. I don't know what's happening, right? But here's the thing. When that shortcut happens, distress can easily become disaster. Again, D's, I'm helping you out, right? But we learn to question. We learn to interrogate those thought feelings, those schemas, and that helps us understand who we truly are. And last week we started to dig into real practical like thought feelings that we have, real practical, what we might call challenging thoughts that really shape us. And we looked at this one that basically said, I am not safe, that I am unsafe. The world is unsafe. And we talked about healing, and we said that healing begins when we realize we're not always unsafe, and that we can allow love to bring our bodies and our souls back into harmony. We talked about how that happens, that our nervous system can kind of go into overdrive, and there can be a disconnect, right? And how love and creating safety can bring that back together and can calm our bodies, right? And so this week we want to explore another very common thought feeling that most of us have experienced that's very closely related to safety. And we want to unpack this idea of a challenging thought: I can't trust anyone. Have y'all ever felt that? No? Like, I can't trust anyone. Here's the thing. First fill in. I'm going to give you a second, then I'll start talking again. People don't know, like, I hate fill-ins because I'm going and I'm talking and I'm in the zone, and then all of a sudden everybody looks down at their page and starts writing, and then they come back and I've moved on to something and they're catching half a sentence and they're like, he just said the devil's a good person? What's going on, right? And then I get the nasty email because you were filling in a blank when I was continued to talk, right? So there we go. All right, so your first fill-in: trust is a fragile part of our psyche. Trust is one of the first things that breaks when we experience trauma, when we experience betrayal, when we experience deep disappointment. Our ability to trust, right? If we think of trust as a phenomenon in our hearts, in our lives, the ability to trust anyone, forget about whether they deserve it or not, but just trust is broken, this idea. And while it's the first thing to break often, it's one of the last things to heal. It's one of the last things to heal. And it's whether through or a relationship trust is broken, maybe an institution, faith, God. Like, once trust fractures, suspicion becomes a reflex, right? We get very suspicious. And our minds go into this mode of like, prove it, right? Like, our minds tell us they need to prove themselves to us. They need to prove that they're worthy. And so we get into very protective mode. And so while our mind is saying, please prove it, our heart is whispering alongside of that, please don't hurt me again. Please don't hurt me again. And then our bodies do what we talked about last week, right? Our bodies go into survival mode, our nervous system goes into overdrive, and we prepare for retreat. And this happens subtly in our lives. When trust is broken, we start to assume that a friend's silence means that they are rejecting us. It could mean that they're busy or they have their own problems. But we just, our like trust overdrive that's been broken brings us to a dark place. How many of you maybe work with somebody? I know none of you do this, right? Because you're all so smart. You go to the best church in the world. That's how I know you're so smart. Right? How many of y'all work with somebody who over-controls projects because teamwork feels risky to them? Like, they had people who may be disappointed, they didn't fulfill, and so they just kind of go into overdrive of like controlling everything. They're texting you every 5 minutes to make sure that you checked the email that was sent 30 seconds ago, right? There's a trust thing there. Some of us, our trust has been broken with the divine, with God. For whatever reason, whatever experience, you pray and then you just kind of brace yourself. You brace yourself for disappointment. You brace yourself for pain. Because what happens in our lives is broken trust rewires our expectations. It rewires what we expect of ourselves, of other people. And there's lots of research on this, lots of research around how our brains are rewired. In the book, The Body Keeps the Score, how many of you have ever heard of this book, The Body Keeps the Score, right? Bessel van der Kolk, they wrote this, trauma almost invariably involves not being seen, not being mirrored, not being taken into account. And when people feel chronically unsafe, remember we talked about safety last week, when people feel chronically unsafe, their brains are rewired to focus on survival, not on, what's the word? Trust. Not on trust or connection, right? Diane Poole Heller, who wrote a book called In the Power of Attachment, or it's called The Power of Attachment, How to Create Deep and Lasting Relationships. She writes this: when early trust is broken, our bodies organize around protection. Here's the expectation shift. We no longer expect others to be a source of comfort in our lives. Instead, we prepare for disappointment. And these patterns can persist long after the danger is gone. Right? So here's the thing. If someone we depended on failed us, our brain learns dependence equals danger. That's what our brain learns. And the research shows us that when trust is broken, the brain rewires itself for protection instead of connection. And so we start expecting danger where love once lived or where love should have lived. Right? So when trust breaks, our brains build these walls to keep us safe. And those same walls, though, will keep us safe, but they will also keep love from getting in. And so all this research, all this talk about rewired brains and protective reflexes kind of brings us to this one deep, painful truth of the human experience that many of us have lived. All right, big time fill-ins. You're getting 3 fill-ins in one sentence, so I'm going to give you time to put these down if you're a fill-in person. When trust breaks, connection feels dangerous. Connection feels dangerous. People are not safe. People are not worthy of our trust. No one is. Vulnerability feels foolish. Why would I tell you about my life? Why would I tell you about my hopes, my fears, my dreams? You're just going to use those against me. Right? So vulnerability feels very foolish. Why would I do that? And divine love feels suspect. The idea that God could just be love. That the experience of God is any act of love that we experience. Right? That can feel very suspect. And so here's the thing. If the thought feeling that we're interrogating this week is, I can't trust anyone, including myself maybe, I can't trust anyone, then John chapter 21, fourth gospel, New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Remember, gospels are stories about Jesus. They're stories about the message of Jesus, the importance of Jesus, their theology, not history necessarily. John chapter 21 gives us a mirror, because again, I always talk about Scripture can be this mirror that we can see ourselves in, we can see the human experience in pretty well. It gives us a mirror of what it looks like and it feels like when trust feels impossible, when trust is lost. But it also gives us a pretty powerful picture of how love can begin to rebuild it. Just one breakfast at a time, one little moment at a time. And you know, when we talk about trust, most of us think about people who've let us down, right? I mean, that's kind of the first thing we think of. We don't think about, like, do I trust myself? Or we generally think of people who've let us down. But sometimes the deepest breaks in our trust, right? Sometimes they aren't about other people, right? It's just about life, life experiences that don't turn out the way we thought they would, or the way somebody told us they would, or the way somebody promised who stood up in my position, who looked like me. Well, maybe they didn't look like me. There's only so many people this handsome in the world, right? But at the end of the day, they carried the same title. And they told you, this is how the world works. And then all of a sudden it was like, that's not how the world works. And so there's this whole thing about trust in general. And that is what we find, that's where we find Peter in John chapter 21. Like in the midst of a shattered world, trust broken all around. He has just lived through textbook trauma. Like if you were to go to the DSM and look up like trauma, there would be like Peter after the crucifixion, right? Like what he experienced, what he saw, what shaped him. His entire world had collapsed. And everything he trusted broke down. He trusted the vision of Jesus, gone. He trusted the mission of Jesus, gone. He trusted that there was a future in following this Jesus, gone. He had left his livelihood. He left his nets, sold his fishing, was done. His whole life was going to be following this Jesus, this one who would set Israel free, this one who would change the oppression. And it all came tumbling down on a hill just outside the city, where empire legally imposed their will and their way and killed Jesus. It all ended. Everything died on that hill. The moment, the movement, everything scattered. Everything broke. The miracle worker was gone. The story was over. So when we meet Peter here in John 21, like his trust has been broken in every direction, right? His trust in the idea that God is present and at work fractured because the world didn't unfold the way he expected, the way he had interpreted the life of this man, Jesus. I imagine that his trust in himself was shattered because in his worst moment, we read a few chapters earlier that he had denied even knowing this Jesus 3 times. He stood around a fire. Hey, no, it wasn't me. I don't know him. To the point where he finally swore, I don't know. I'm not going to say what he said. It's really vulgar. It's in the Greek. I'm just kidding. It's not there. Come on, y'all. I've taught you not to be that gullible, all right? If anybody ever says, well, it's in the Greek, be very suspect, right? It would be very suspect. Peter's all disoriented. He's ashamed. He's not sure who to trust, not even himself. And like so many of us in that moment of feeling betrayed or being the betrayer or our grief, Peter does what feels safest, right? He goes back to what he knows. In John chapter 21, verses 1 through 19, we find that he goes back to fishing, right? This is what it says. It says that after these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Very interesting language, by the way, about this resurrected reality being an appearance and showing himself to the disciples in unique ways. And if you read the story carefully, it brings up some fascinating questions about what those experiences were for the earliest followers of Jesus. And it says that they were gathered there together, and it was Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. So not the whole gang, about half of them are there. And Simon says to them in his frustration, he says, I'm going to go fishing. How many of y'all like to go fishing when you're frustrated? Anybody? Just feels like a really bad idea, though. I mean, every time I've gone fishing, it seems like it's more frustrating than fishing, right? So I don't know, it feels like a bad choice. But at any rate, he says, I'm going to go fishing. And this isn't like I'm going to go fishing for like fun. It's like, I got to go fish. I've got to go fishing. I've got to make some money. What are we going to do here? And they're like, all right, we'll go with you too. And so they went out, they got into the boat, but that night they didn't catch anything. See, Peter in this moment, he returns to what was safe, what felt safe. Something he could control. I can control where I throw the nets. I can control how I pull those. I can control how long I'm out in the boat. I can control which way I steer this boat, where I go do the fishing. It felt safe when all that trust was broken. And isn't that how we function? When trust breaks, we go back to what we know. Sometimes not healthy habits. Sometimes not necessarily good things, but things that we just know, the routines, the habits, those old things that feel safe, leaving people outside. Oh, I let somebody in. I got hurt, so now I'm going to put it back outside. I'm going to put up all those walls. But somehow in that experience, it doesn't seem to be the same. Life doesn't work the same way. You cast your nets out in the same waters, but nothing happens. Nothing happens. And that's what happens when our souls kind of long for and go back to those things that we once trusted because our trust has been broken. So we go back to what feels safe. We can go through all the same motions, but the meaning and the energy and the joy, right, it's different. It's different because trust is broken. And something inside of us still believes that nothing good is going to happen. Some of you are here today and your religious experience has been so painful and harmful. And you're thinking to yourself, it's just too good. It can't be real. It can't be that there's really a church that I would fit in. It can't be a church that would accept all of me. That's fair, right? But that's that wall. That's that mechanism. And I'm not telling you that that wall isn't important in your life, but it's there. The text continues, it goes on, and says, just after daybreak, right? If I'm the disciples, I'm a little ticked off as I reflect on this experience. I'm like, why didn't Jesus show up 4 or 5 hours into this little fishing expedition? Why did he wait until the following day? If he's this resurrected reality, wouldn't he know that I wasn't going to catch all these fish? So why in the world would he leave me out there for 5 hours throwing fishing nets and coming back? But that's just me. That's the way I think. Okay, so Jesus stands on the beach, and the disciples are out there, and they didn't know that it was Jesus. So for everybody that wants to make resurrection clear on what it was and how it worked, right? They didn't know it was Jesus. And we know from the text that they're not that far away off the shore. So however Jesus is there, they don't know that it was him. I'm just going to let that sit in for a second, okay? However, the reality of Jesus is appearing to them in this moment, the writer of this story knows that there's something different. There's something strange, right? Now, I think it's fascinating that they didn't recognize Jesus, and from a metaphorical perspective, why? Well, maybe because all that trust that had been broken had built up a wall between the disciples and their experience of hope to the point where they couldn't even recognize Jesus. There was so much pain, so much hurt that Jesus is right in front of them. The hope is right in front of them. And that detail feels true to me in real life. Not that this story isn't real life, but in your everyday normal life, Like that feels like a reality. Like when you've gone through so much pain and so much hurt and trust has been broken, like goodness could be standing in front of you, but the wall is so big you can't recognize it. Have you ever had that experience, right? Your heart has been broken. You had a relationship that you thought would never turn into what it did, and then trust is broken, and you have this beautiful human standing in front of you that you feel your heart loving and connecting, but there's this big wall and you can't see the beauty of it because of all that pain. That's what happens when we're hurting, when we have been betrayed, or when we've betrayed ourselves. Hope or love can be right there in front of us, and we can't recognize it. And that trauma, right, of broken trust, it doesn't just change how we see other people, it changes how we see hope and love itself, how we define these things, whether we even think they are real. And this is what Jesus says. Jesus from the source says, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" He probably didn't say it that way. That's kind of rigid. He's really like, "Hey, you don't have any fish, do you?" Right? Which, how many of y'all know if you've been fishing and that's how somebody greets you, that's not exactly helpful? Right? And they answer this guy, who they don't know is Jesus, no. No. But look at the word. Look at what Jesus says. He calls them children. If you were here last week, Jesus used a very similar phrase when he addressed this woman. He said, daughter. He said, children. It's so tender. It's not scolding. He's not testing them. He's reconnecting. He's reconnecting with them. In this one little question, Jesus begins this slow, gentle process of rebuilding trust. And he says, okay, so here's the deal. Cast your nets to the right side of the boat and you'll find some. And so that's what they did. And now they weren't able to even haul it in because there were so many fish. And then the disciple that Jesus loved, this is a phrase that John loves to use, maybe about themselves, right? The disciple whom Jesus loved looks at Peter and he's like, it's Jesus, it's the Lord. And Simon Peter hears that it's Jesus. And he grabs his shirt and he puts it on, and because he had taken it off because he's fishing, he's been out there for 5-6 hours. He takes it off and he jumps into the sea and he starts swimming out there. But the other disciples are like, oh, here we go again. Peter, when is this guy going to stop and think, we got to get the nets and the fish and the boat back in there? What if we all jumped off the boat? Then where would we be, Peter? Way to think about us. But that's not what the text says. The text just said they stayed in the boat. They dragged the net full of fish. They weren't too far from the land. They were just about 100 yards off. And I think it's important for us to recognize that for Peter in this moment that's going to rebuild trust, he had to take a risk. You can't rebuild trust without risk. I just don't know that that's possible. Now, you should take healthy risks, and we should take healthy risks in this, right? But the text says that when they finally realized it was Jesus, they tell Peter it's Jesus. We don't even know if Peter knows it's Jesus or not. He just heard one of the disciples say it's Jesus, right? He jumps off. He can't even wait for the boat to get back to the dock. He throws himself into the water. He swims to shore. And that's the thing about trust, even when it's broken. Even when our trust is broken, there's something in our hearts that aches to believe again. There's something in our hearts that aches for that connection, that aches for that trust to be rebuilt. And Peter's body is there kind of before his brain can catch up. So he's like out of the boat. He's going blah, blah, blah. Now it says when they got ashore, they saw that there was a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. And Jesus says to them, bring some of the fish that you've just caught, bring it over here. And so Simon Peter, he was like, well, I guess I have to do it. They brought him all the way here. I should go over there. So he goes over, hauls off some of the fish, brings the nets ashore. There's 153 fish, a very specific number, which is interesting to me. There's a lot of places where there's not a lot of specifics in the Gospel of John, and here we got 153 fish. Want everybody to know. This is the way my brain works, okay. And there's so many, the net wasn't torn, right? So there's this miracle that takes place even in the provision, right? Now, I want to pause for a second and talk about this fire. Because the fire here is a site, is a place where trust has been lost, but it's also going to be rebuilt. There's only one other charcoal fire that's mentioned in the Gospel of John. And that's back in John chapter 18. I mentioned it earlier. That night, It says that Peter stood in the courtyard and denied even knowing Jesus. And it mentions very specifically that in the courtyard was a charcoal fire. How many of you have ever smelled charcoal? Like if I were to bring charcoal here and light it up right now, you would immediately recognize it as a charcoal smell, right? Not a trick question. Okay, good, thank you. Sometimes I give you trick questions, that one's not. Like charcoal has a very distinct kind of smell, and if charcoal like gets in your lungs, right? But here's the thing, like if you're Peter and you've just been through this experience, what do you think the smell of charcoal brought him back to? It had to have brought him back to that night. That charcoal fire would have burned its way right into his nervous system. Anytime he would have smelled charcoal, it is safe to say that that smell would be forever connected with his denial and abandonment of Jesus. His body would have kept that score. He would have gone back to that night. And yet here it is again, that same smell and that same setup. But this time, there's no denial. There's no accusation. There's no judgment. There's just breakfast. There's just breakfast. Jesus doesn't bring up the failure. He doesn't demand an apology. He doesn't say, Peter, you need to repent. You need to repent. You're a bad boy. How could you do that to me? For everybody that wants repentance to be this like necessary work for God's love, there's none of that here. None of it. In fact, Peter is so emotionally unintelligent, he doesn't even apologize. Right? Like, first thing I'd be like, Jesus, I really didn't mean it. I mean, it was a tough night. I mean, everybody was going through their thing. I mean, sorry. We don't get that ever, right? Jesus just says, let's come and have some breakfast together. And this is like divine trauma care in like real time. Right? Peter's memory associated with that smell is shame. And what's happening in this moment is that smell, that experience is being rewritten with safety. That same sensory trigger that would have told Peter he was worthless is now bringing Peter into a space of peace. The smell of the fire, the taste of the bread, the warmth of community, all of these things go back to that night. All of these things go back to what we call the Last Supper, where Jesus broke bread and he shared it with them. And he shared the wine. Like we even get the same language here. These are the building blocks of trust. It's what psychologists, psychiatrists, helping professionals would call somatic repair. The body, the nervous system is learning through a new experience in that same moment that the danger is past. But in spiritual language, what I'd like to call it is just grace made tangible. Grace can be this idea that floats around in the ether, but here's this moment where grace is embodied in some fish and some charcoal and a reliving of a horrible, horrible moment in a safe place. And Jesus is like, he's like, you don't have to prove anything to be safe with me. Let's just sit and eat around the charcoal fire. You don't have to be reminded of your worst mistake every time you smell this. But I think we see something kind of powerful in the next few verses, and that's that like trust doesn't always come back at one time. It's not just one breakfast, right? There's this repetitive nature that has to come back over and over again. We have to experience it in small doses almost to know that we still belong. It's this repetition, it's this presence. And we get that here. Because the text says none of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? They're still sitting there like, maybe, is it? I think, I don't know. Doesn't look quite like him. They don't want to ask him because they just knew in their hearts that it was Jesus. They just knew in their hearts. And here's what's really amazing. This is where we start to see this, like all that pain being undone and all the healing start to take place. It says that Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them. Last time we would have heard of Jesus doing this in the Gospel of John would have been the Last Supper, right before everybody left him. So he gives them the bread, and he does the same with the fish, just like he did with the wine. That's what Jesus does. It says this was the third time that Jesus had appeared to them after he was raised to the dead. And when they had finished breakfast, he has this conversation with Peter, Jesus does. And maybe you've heard this, right? Jesus asks him 3 times, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And we're not sure, like some people think maybe he's asking them, do you love me more than the fish? Some people think maybe Jesus was looking at the other disciples. You love me more than the other disciples. It's hard for me to imagine like Jesus saying, I just want to make sure you love me more than everybody else because I'm feeling kind of a little less than. I need to know that you love me. I think he's saying, do you love me more than this idea of going back to fishing? Do you love me more than, he says, yes, Lord, you know that I loved you. He says, well, then feed my sheep. You're capable, Peter. Remember, this is a story that's helping us understand a bigger truth. Jesus is in this moment saying, hey, the first time you denied me, I'm telling you, no, you still love me. And that's all it takes is love. So go feed my sheep. Go feed my sheep. And then a second time, they eat a little bit. He says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, well, then tend my sheep. Because love is enough. I know all this stuff has happened. I get it. I was there. But here's the thing. You love me. You're saying you love me. Like, stop not believing in yourself. Stop not trusting in love. Stop not trusting that I'm here present with you. And then he said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter now is hurt, which is always a fantastic twist in this story, right? He's like why Peter would ever feel hurt after what he's done is just kind of funny to me. But Peter does what we all do, right? He becomes the victim in the story. He's hurt. And he says, in this third time, do you love me? And he says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And then Jesus just says, well, then feed my sheep. What are you fishing for? What are we doing here, Peter? What are we doing here, Peter? And Jesus isn't punishing, he's rewiring Peter's brain. Hey, let's sit at the site of your greatest failure and let's talk about how that doesn't define you. All the meanwhile in the background is the smell of the charcoal fire, are the hands that broke the bread and gave it to him on the night that his greatest failure would take place. And it's time and a little healing and little healing. It's the reminders, it's these questions. It's Jesus saying, you know what, Peter, you're saying to yourself a story. You're saying that you can't be trusted. You're saying I can't be trusted. You're saying I'm disqualified. You're saying I've failed too deeply. And Jesus meets each of those lies with the truth. You still have purpose, Peter. You still have a calling. All is not lost. You still belong. And this is the slow grace of restoration. Jesus doesn't erase the past. He enters it. He enters the space and he transforms it. He takes what is meant to be for harm and turns it into something good. He redeems it. And it's at that first charcoal fire that Peter said, I don't know him. But at this fire, love says, I know you, and I still choose you. And that's how the divine works. That's how divine trust works. It doesn't ignore the wound. It enters it. It brings it trust, and it brings it purpose. And it says, no, listen, your place of pain can also be a place of power. And so here's what I don't want us to miss. As we think about this big idea of trust, consistent, repetitive, embodied experience, right? That's what those three questions represent. That's what the charcoal fire represents. These consistent, repetitive, embodied experiences of grace, they restored Peter's ability to trust himself and Jesus. What happened around that fire wasn't just forgiveness, it was retraining the brain, rewiring it. Each question, each response, each bite of breakfast worked like this gentle repetition of safety and trust. And I love it that Jesus didn't just use words alone. He brought him into an experience. And that's how trust works. That's how trust heals us. Not all at once, but in safe experiences over time, until the body starts to believe what the heart has heard. You are still loved. You can still be trusted. There are things and there are people in this world that you can trust, that you can give your heart to. And so in our everyday normal lives, how do we live this out? When you leave here committed to being a peacemaker, walking the peacemaking path of Jesus in a world that seems very divided, that doesn't want, that we go, can I even trust that if I post this on my social media, I won't be called horrible things? Or even better yet, I will still post it knowing I'll be called horrible things because I trust that I am more than that. Right? I wish he would have had his iPhone out for this whole experience. Like being a social media influencer, he's recording the whole thing, and then he could go out and market as a masterclass on replacing stuck points in our lives. Right? Stuck points. In trauma-informed therapy, particularly cognitive processing therapy, you work through what are called stuck points. And a stuck point is a thought that once helped you survive, but now keeps you from living fully. It's a stuck point. It's the belief, like, I can't trust anyone, I'll just get hurt again. Right? It's a thought feeling that served you well, but no longer serves you well. Right? Because your body, your system is still thinking, I'm back in that space of pain. So they protect us, but they can also trap us. Now remember our anchor verse we started here, Philippians 4:8, that says what? Finally, beloved, whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, commendable, if there is any excellence and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about those things. See, stuck points are the thought feelings, like I can't trust anyone, that inhibit us from thinking about what is honorable and true and just and pure and pleasing. And so these kinds of cognitive therapies, they help us notice those thoughts. We write them down. We gently challenge them with questions, with better questions. Is this thought feeling 100% true? Is there maybe another way to see this? This is how we interrogate it, right? What would love say about this experience? And that's kind of what Jesus does with Peter right here. He doesn't argue with his shame. He doesn't say, oh, Peter, you got nothing to be ashamed about. Come on. That's such a silly thought. No, he just like processes it through with him. He invites him to rethink that story, to rethink that challenging thought. Each do you love me replaced an old belief with a truer one, right? From I can't be trusted to I'm still called. From I failed to I'm forgiven. From I'm disqualified to I'm invited. So in our everyday normal life, how do we practice this? 4 things you can do when you start to feel this stuck point, right? 4 things. Everybody hold up 4 fingers for me. We're going to give you 4. And I'm going to let you pull down 1 finger at a time until you have 1 finger left. And you can decide which one you want to show me, okay, based upon this message, all right? In communication, what I just did there was just kind of give us a little break from the emotion of the talk, all right? Okay, so here we go. Practice number 1. When you feel something, write something. All right? So when you feel that stuck point, write it down. Write it down. When you feel that protective reflex, that distrust, that withdrawal, that control, pause and ask, what story am I telling myself right now? And naming it will loosen its grip. Just naming it. When you feel that, just name it. And then practice number 2. So if you got 4 fingers, you can take one down. We're down to have 3 left, right? Re-say it with a grounded truth. So re-say that statement, rethink that, but use language that's honest but more balanced. So instead of what I'm telling myself is, what's happening in my mind and my heart is that I can't trust anyone, write something down like, I've been hurt, yes, but not everyone will hurt me. See how that's different? Right? Or you could say, love can teach me safety again. Right? So we write down the truth of our experience, but we write down a fuller truth. You're not pretending the pain didn't happen, that the broken trust didn't happen. You're just refusing to let it define every relationship in your life. Okay, so we got 3. We're down to 2 fingers. All right, we got 2 left. Practice number 3, embody the new story. Embody it. Trust isn't rebuilt in your head. It's rebuilt through small, safe experiences. So here's the thing. Rebuild it bodily. Let someone carry part of your load, enough that if they were to drop it, life wouldn't fall apart. Somebody asks, what can I do to help? You know, maybe don't start with like, well, if you could create a fuller sense of who I am, that would be wonderful. Maybe it's, you know what, my life is insane right now. I'm going through a lot. If I were to Venmo you, could you go pick up my groceries for me? Maybe start there. And then let them form your identity in some unhealthy way. No, don't do that, right? Maybe it's just pray honestly again. Maybe you haven't engaged in the practice of prayer in a long time because it just wasn't safe. And I get that. I totally get that. But maybe it's like, okay, I'm just going to be honest in my prayer. God, I don't know if you're there. I don't know if you're listening. I don't know how this works. I don't know if I should be asking for things. I don't have any idea, but here's what I'm feeling. And you can just share. Or maybe find a trusted friend, which may be hard, but there's probably one there that you kind of trust. And you can just like share a fear that you have and let them hold it without fixing it, right? And each time you do those things, your nervous system starts to learn it's okay to let someone in. All right, here's the fourth practice. You got one finger left. I want to encourage us as individuals and as a community to be a place of grace, willing to do whatever it takes. Be that person who helps others learn to trust again. Be dependable. When people show up guarded in your life, don't take it personally. Don't get hurt by that. Take it tenderly. Recognize that there's hurt and there's pain there, and it's not me. It's what's happened to them. And every time you and I come into a space and we offer calm presence and consistency, we become part of love's therapy plan for someone else. You know, as I was preparing for this talk, which I should have prepared longer for because I could have made it shorter. I get it, okay? But I was reminded, I feel like by whatever word you want to use, God, the divine spirit, whatever, as I sat there, I started kind of realizing very early on in my spiritual formation, there were two ideas that were grounded in two songs that hit my life as a teenager. And they probably didn't hit yours because you had normal teenage years, but I did not, okay? But they formed what I thought about God. And they have possessed me, I realized it. And so there's these two songs that formed me when I was a kid attending church camps. And they taught me, the tradition that I was a part of taught me something about God that arrested me and has defined me for the last 30 years. The first song was called Place of Grace. They used to sing this song, and this song said, will you be a place of grace? This was a question asked. You're listening to the song. Will you shine a light of mercy along the way? Will you stand with open arms and a welcoming embrace? I still have vivid memories of the place and the people singing that song and the smell of the old nasty hangar that we used to meet in, because that formed in me the essence of God. That question, who would I be when it came to this faith? And why I am like a rabid dog when it comes to things like inclusion and love and mercy, it's because my tradition taught me that. And somewhere along the way, they lost their freaking minds. And I just held on to what I was taught 30 years ago. And there was a second song. And this song was called He'll Do Whatever It Takes, Pardon the Patriarchy Understanding of God. This song, the verses are these stories of people who have been hurt, who have wandered away from love, who've made mistakes. And the question that they always ask at the end of this, the verses is, I just want to know. I just want to know, how far will he go? Will love reach to me in spite of who I am? Will love reach to me in spite of what I've done? And then the chorus would come in, and the chorus would say this. The chorus would say, he'll do whatever it takes. His grace reaches lower than your worst mistakes, and his love will run farther than you can run away, my friend. He'll do whatever it takes. And while I don't understand everything the Bible has to say about God and how it all doesn't jive with that, this radical idea of God, this radical idea of the divine, ruined me in the best possible way. Because I cannot get rid of that to grow a church. I cannot get rid of that to get a better salary. I cannot get rid of that to get less hate online. I cannot get rid of that to fit any mold because it was formed in me. And here's the thing, it's not a populist movement. It is messy, and it is inclusive, and it is generous, and it is mysterious, and it is for the meek and the humble. And it flows from the teachings of a peasant, penniless prophet who proclaimed to the vilest of empires and to the most vain of religions that God is not manifest in the golden eagles that want to define us or in the rituals that are performed perfectly. No, God is not manifest in power and in prestige. God is not manifest in knowledge and nooses. No, this one that was born in a manger, who was quite possibly raised by a single mom who would have been on welfare today, who was ruled by a foreign occupier, he changed the world with this radical inclusive grace. And he would say to Peter, "You're not a denier. Come on. That's not who you are. You are mine. Trust me." And he would say to the woman with the issue of blood, "You're not sick. That's not what defines you. You're mine. Trust me." And he would say to the ones who crucified him legally, "Forgive them. They're mine. Trust me." And he would say, "Come to me, all who are weary, whether you worship in this mountain or that mountain, whether you are betrayer or betrayed, citizen or immigrant, poor or wealthy, sick or healthy, come to me, all who are weary, all who have lost faith, and trust, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Trust me." And here's the secret. This is not the American gospel that is filled with doctrines and certainty and promises of wealth and health and parsing out who's in and out, claiming that salvation flows from a wooden desk that sits in a white house that refuses to admit that that very house was built by black slaves. It is not that gospel. It is a gospel of grace that flows from a wooden cross, a symbol of state violence and terror that could not silence the voice of the one demanding justice. The one who first said, "No kings here. My kingdom is not of this world." No, this is the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ for the poor and the hungry and the naked and the captive. This is a gospel of grace, and we've lost it. And we need places like this that will suffer whatever consequences to hold up. This is the message. This is the beauty of it. That will not get lost and caught up in having to be right. This is the gospel. This is a grace that rewires us and teaches us to trust again when it's embraced in spite of Christianity, when it's embraced as the light of the world, a light that the darkness of religion and empire will always try to extinguish, but never can. That's what the Gospel of John tells us. It was not a once experience of darkness trying to overcome light. It is the story of the gospel always and never being overcome by darkness. It is the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life. It is how the Spirit rewires us after pain and injury and trauma. It is how Spirit breaks through the lies of religion and politics through grace after grace after grace after grace. Not through one single miracle moment, a prayer that you prayed to repeat after me so that you would feel like you were going to heaven. No, this is a gospel that we experience daily, every day, embodied experiences of grace, just like Peter around the charcoal fire that brought him back to his greatest point of pain, and it became his greatest source of power. Why? Because Spirit, God, the divine, Jesus, whatever words you want to use, love will always do whatever it takes. That's worth living for. That's worth dying for. But it's never worth killing for. It's never worth excluding for. And that makes the world a better place, and that makes me a better person. Because this gospel, this trust that we rebuild, that is rebuilt inside of us, it turns us into, it transforms us. We become different kinds of people in the world. When grace rewires that trust inside of us, it doesn't just stop inside of us, it ripples outward like we always talk about. And when we become trustworthy people because our trust has been restored through this massive experience of grace, all of a sudden, trustworthy people replace walls of isolation. Trustworthy people replace these walls that are built by fear, and they create then pathways, gateways of connection that are paved by hope. Even just a small door in that wall when we refuse to live guarded and we start living generously. That's the beauty of this whole show. This whole thing that we're trying to live out, that the message of Jesus is always twisted and distorted by religion. In fact, all the beautiful messages that are like hidden within faith traditions, they're always distorted by power and religion. So if you're here today and you've experienced a breach in your trust, I just want you to know that we honor that. I honor that. And I want you to know that this is a space for you for as long as it takes to allow those walls to stay there and serve and protect you, but hopefully you can build a little bit of a window at some point in time and let love through that wall, that wall can become a little porous. And if you're here today and you've worked through that and you are a place of grace, that you feel like you are a trustworthy person, then be that in the world. Be that in the world and create that space for others. We're going to have communion together here. And our song that we're going to sing is this really beautiful song about how God is really bigger than all of the pain in our lives. Love is bigger than all the pain in our hurt. All those things that shape our nervous systems, the charcoal fire experiences of pain. And this song tells us that there is something that we can trust in when all trust is lost. When life feels like it's beating us up. When life feels like we can't make it. I want to encourage you to sing this song and think about this lyric that just tells us, you know what? In the midst of it all, right? There is a God, there is a divine reality that always sees us. Even in our barest and our darkest and our most desperate seasons, no matter what the circumstances, here's the thing we can trust in: love. Love is the rock on which I stand. And that is a radical idea. And if there's one thing that I just want every person on this planet, and certainly every person that walks into this door, in the doors of our church, that comes into your life, is to know that they are loved. Regardless of what they believe politically, theologically, that they are loved at the very core of who they are. And that can heal and that can trust. So you're invited to the table today. The body of Christ broken for you, the blood of Christ shed for you, as we sing this song and we reflect on God's invitation to be peacemakers in this world.